I came upon this video by someone calling themselves Brother Jason, who claims that atheists somehow misrepresent what faith is and are therefore bad because of it. Now, my position is that faith is an excuse to believe something for which you have no actual evidence to support, which I'm sure makes me a horrible human being in the eyes of the religious. So let's take a look at Brother Jason and see why he thinks that faith is a good thing.
Hi, I'm Brother Jason, and in this video I'll be discussing the way atheists dishonestly misrepresent and redefine faith and how this represents a double standard in their thinking.
Hi, Brother Jason. It should come as no surprise at all that I disagree with pretty much everything you've said so far, but I'm happy to look at your justifications and see if we can come to some common ground. So please, go on.
Atheists will often define faith as something people have without any reason or evidence to support that belief.
In fact, that's the definition that's given in the Bible. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." The dictionary defines faith as strong belief in God or in some doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. It's not atheists that define it that way. It's everybody.
They think of it as a blind leap a person takes when they have no evidence for a belief.
Which is true. If you have evidence, you don't need faith.
According to them, if you have evidence for a belief, then it wouldn't require faith to believe in it. Is this true?
Which, again, is true, because by every agreed upon definition of the word that we have, faith exists only in the absence of proof. Once you have proof, you no longer need faith. So what's the problem?
For example, on page 308 of The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins writes, quote, "Faith is an evil precisely because it requires no justification and brooks no argument," end quote.
I don't know that I'd say it was evil necessarily. I mean, certainly evil can be done in the name of faith or with faith as its justification, but is faith itself evil? I don't know about that. But I would say that faith is empty. Anyone can have faith in anything for any emotional reason they desire. You can have faith in Bigfoot, or alien abductions, or leprechauns. None of these things have any evidence for them, but people do believe in them, and they do so because of faith.
On the Bible-thumping Wingnut show, Aaron Ross said, quote, "With faith, you can just make up anything that you want and assert it as fact, even though it's not evidently true," end quote.
Yep, you can. Of course, that doesn't mean that you must do that. It isn't a requirement of faith, just an option of faith.
The most accurate definition of faith, according to Matt Dillahunty on episode number 882 of The Atheist Experience, is, quote, "the justification people give for beliefs when they don't have a good reason," end quote.
And I would agree with that. Because again, if you have a good reason for the things that you believe, if you can point to objective evidence, if you can justify your beliefs with logic and reason, then you've got no reason to rely on faith. Now, I get that you're really emotionally invested in the word faith, but if you have any of those things, faith is not what you have. It's a well-reasoned and rational belief based on the evidence.
One wonders why such phrases as blind faith and leap of faith even exist if faith, by definition, supposedly already includes these ideas.
There's a reason those terms are pejorative. Blind faith, and as you point out, all faith is really blind, that's not something you should really be proud of. It's not something you should value. So why do you?
Just the fact that faith can be defined as blind or as a leap in certain circumstances actually proves that these ideas are not actually a part of the definition of the word.
Wrong. Let's just look at the definition of blind faith. The dictionary defines it as belief without true understanding, perception, or discrimination. And that's virtually identical to the definition of faith in and of itself. You're just attached to the term without recognizing that the term marks you as ignorant.
I suppose William Lane Craig should rename his ministry Reasonable Blind Leap Without Evidence.
That's exactly what he's doing whether you like it or not. But he's using the term for the same reason you are, because it has an emotional impact on the religious. It accurately describes what you're doing. You're just offended that people are pointing out the failures of your belief instead of recognizing that your beliefs are faulty.
But as a Christian, is my faith in God just a blind leap I take without evidence?
Yes, it is.
How does God himself define faith in his written revelation?
Well, that's making a blind leap right there. It's called being totally self-unaware. You're just assuming, without evidence, that any gods exist or that they have revealed themselves at all. And you wonder why people make fun of you.
First of all, the Greek word that we translate faith in the New Testament is pistis, which means to be persuaded.
Being persuaded does not mean being correct. People are persuaded by all kinds of things that are factually incorrect all the time. Just because you like an idea doesn't mean that idea is true. Heck, people believe in all kinds of other gods than yours, and you think all of them are wrong. Are you telling me that they haven't been persuaded to believe in those gods just like you have?
And as we'll see, in the Bible, people are not being persuaded to just take a blind leap, but are instead being told to believe on the basis of evidence.
Then where is that evidence? Because every single example of faith in the Bible is of the blind variety. I mean, look at the story of doubting Thomas in John 20:24-29. Jesus specifically says, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." He's blessing those who have no evidence and believe anyhow. How do you know so little about your own Bible?
Jesus said in John 10:37-38, "If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe in me. But if I do them, though you do not believe in me, believe the works, so that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father."
Geez, talk about ripping things out of context. This is the story of Jews wanting to stone Jesus for blasphemy because he says he's the Son of God. But Jesus says in verse 34, "Is it not written in your law, I have said that you are gods?" He denied speaking blasphemy because he's only saying that he's the same as everyone else. And then he runs away. Yeah, that's impressive.
Now notice here, Jesus is specifically appealing to his miracles as the evidence that testifies of who he is.
No, he's not. He's calling for the Jews to let him go because he's one of them.
In verse 37, he actually says that if the evidence doesn't exist, that people shouldn't just take his word for who he says he is. He says that people should believe in him based on the evidence, and if no evidence exists, then people shouldn't believe in him.
But again, he presents no actual evidence. He doesn't just perform some miracle for the Jews to convince them. He's just making a theological argument and trying to get out of being killed for heresy. You don't know what evidence is, do you?
Jesus' own definition is the exact opposite of the atheist definition.
You're reading things into that out-of-context passage that simply do not exist there in context. And I guess that's no surprise. Apologists aren't all that concerned with truth, but come on, this is stretching even for the emotionally attached.
In Acts 17, Paul preaches to the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers in Athens, and at the end of his speech he tells them they need to repent or they'll be judged by God. Does he just expect them to take his word for that without any reason or evidence?
Yes, he does. Because there's no objective reason to think that gods of any kind actually exist in the real world. It's an empty threat because there's no God evident to punish them.
No, he concludes in verse 31 by saying that God has furnished proof to all men by raising him, that's Jesus, from the dead.
And where's the evidence that this actually happened? This is yet another empty claim in the Bible that you're taking seriously. Where is this supposed evidence that is supposed to convince the people of that era that Jesus is actually risen from the dead? And if he has no evidence then, why should we take that claim seriously today? I mean, come on, you're just being ridiculous.
So Paul points to the resurrection of Jesus as the evidence to persuade the Athenians to repent.
But the resurrection of Jesus is just a claim. It is not, in and of itself, evidence of anything, any more than I can point to the crash at Roswell as evidence that aliens are real. Making a claim is not evidence.
In fact, earlier in the same chapter, it says in verses 2 through 4, "And according to Paul's custom, he went to them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, This Jesus, whom I am proclaiming to you, is the Christ. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of God-fearing Greeks and a number of the leading women."
Which, again, isn't evidence. Arguing from a book isn't proving that the book is true. Getting people to agree with you without having any actual evidence to support your claims is nothing to be proud of. Shysters do it all the time. All you're doing is proving that these people believed blindly, not that they saw any objective evidence that the claims were true.
Notice that Paul reasoned with people
from the Bible. That's different from arguing from a reasonable and critically evaluated position.
Gave them evidence.
He did not give them objective evidence. He presented the words of the Bible as evidence. There's a big difference there.
And persuaded them to believe.
And conned them into believing that what he said was true. And that's what religion does. Scientology doesn't present clear and objective evidence for the existence of Xenu. They point to the writings of L. Ron Hubbard and claim that what he said was true. Paul did exactly the same thing. Gullible people believed him. Why do you think that's something to be proud of?
All things atheists erroneously assert are absent from faith. Examples such as these can be multiplied many times over.
Bad examples? Yes. Places where actual evidence was presented? Not even once.
Now that you've seen what faith really means and just a few examples of how people came to faith in the Bible, how is it that atheists are so ignorant about this?
Because you're not paying the slightest bit of attention to what they're saying. You have no clue what evidence actually is. You're pretending that empty claims and unsupported arguments count. And they don't. When we say evidence for the existence of God, we mean trot God out here and let us objectively experience God for ourselves. Let us know when you can do that. Anything else is not impressive.
Let's examine Matt Dillahunty as a case study. He was a Christian for 20 years and presents himself as an expert on the Bible. Yet, even when a Christian caller on his show points out to him that he's defining faith incorrectly, he persists in his false definition.
Except it isn't a false definition. Now, I'm not defending Matt, he can do that on his own, but I've given the definition of faith, both from the Bible and from the dictionary, and neither of those are even close to what you're claiming faith is. The one with the false definition is you.
Why? In episode number 882 of the Atheist Experience, Mr. Dillahunty justifies his intentional misrepresentation of faith by stating, quote, "I'm talking about how people actually use the word," end quote.
And that's how people actually use the word, specifically within the context of religion. I don't think you can find a single religious apologist who uses it any differently. I mean, one who argues that they believe in God because they have demonstrable, objective evidence that God actually exists in the real world, and they can present that evidence for our perusal. It simply doesn't happen.
So words don't get to have real objectively true definitions. According to Mr. Dillahunty's linguistic relativism, words are defined however people just happen to use them.
I already gave you the definition, both from the Bible and from the dictionary. That's about as objective as you can get.
And since he's spoken to Christians who've used the very concept of faith as their justification for their faith, that must be how it's defined.
Well, the Bible sure seems to think so. I mean, it's very, very clear on what faith is. Why are you so ignorant of your own book?
And no dictionaries, examples from the Bible or theologians, none of that is going to change his mind about his definition of faith.
You already have that, and you're ignoring it.
Now, this seems to me to just be his attempt to keep defining words the way he wants them to be defined so he can continue to insult people.
Which he's not doing. You are. You're redefining words that appear both in the dictionary and in the Bible because you don't like what those things have to say. I mean, hypocritical much?
In Christianity, faith has an objective meaning, and that meaning is found in the Bible.
Like Hebrews 11:1, which you seem to keep missing.
We just saw what it was and how it's used. As a Christian, it's my responsibility to hold other Christians to what the Bible says. If Christians are using the word faith as just a blind leap, that's objectively wrong because that's not how it's used in the Bible. Okay, that's nice, but why should atheists care? As Mr. Dillahunty himself asks, quote, if there are Christians who are using it the way I'm talking about, why is it my problem if they've used it wrong? End quote. And here's why you should care, atheists. Because if you don't, then you're hypocrites and you're committing the fallacy of special pleading.
Hardly. Because you admit that there are Christians who do use it that way. And in fact, I'd argue that all Christians use it that way because there isn't a single one out there who can point to any objective evidence for the existence of their God, period. There are people who claim they can, but none who can actually manage to back it up. Now, you be sure to let us know when somebody does, okay?
Allow me to explain. What if I called into the atheist experience and defined atheism as the positive belief that God doesn't exist?
Cool. Can you point to a majority of atheists that do that? Can you present any actual evidence to back up your claim? Yeah, I didn't think so.
He would correct me and say that atheism isn't a belief, but simply the lack of a belief in God. Now imagine I respond by telling him that he's wrong because every atheist I talk to defines atheism as a positive belief in God's inexistence. How would he respond to this?
Well, personally, I'd say you're full of shit.
Presumably, he might appeal to dictionary definitions or how atheists have defined atheism historically. But then I can just quote him back to himself. I'm talking about how people actually use the word.
Then you'd be responsible for showing that that's how atheists actually use the word, and I don't think you can do it. Because we can show that's how theists actually use the word. And even people like you, who claim to have evidence, can't actually back up your claims.
But they're wrong, he tells me. I can again quote him to himself. Just replace Christians with the word atheist. If there are atheists who are using it the way I'm talking about, why is it my problem if they've used it wrong?
Again, pony up that evidence that shows you have the slightest idea what it is you're talking about. And I'm sure Matt can do that. I know I can. But the burden of proof rests entirely on your shoulders. Put up or shut up.
And of course, I might be wrong. Maybe he wouldn't argue in that way. But if he would, then he has a double standard.
Doubtful. I mean, you'd have to take that up with him, but I would find it a bit hard to believe. I'm sure he'd make you look just like the idiot that you are.
Now, atheists are usually very militant about how their atheism is not a belief. So I highly doubt he would just give that up.
Because atheism isn't a belief. Why would he give up the truth?
He wants to define faith in order to make Christians and all religious people look stupid.
They don't need his help.
But he has an obvious double standard because if someone were to use his exact arguments against him when it comes to defining atheism, he would reject his own arguments, thereby demonstrating that he's arguing fallaciously.
Which isn't true. Now again, I'm not going to step in and try to defend Matt Dillahunty, but from my own personal perspective, you're not making a rational argument here at all. You misunderstand what he's saying, purposely, because what he's saying makes you look like an idiot, and you don't like that. So you're spinning your own narrative in such a way as to make yourself look better, but your own arguments simply don't stand up to a moment's critical scrutiny. It's like flat earthers saying that clearly they have evidence that the earth is flat, but they just can't actually produce anything worth paying any attention to.
So, in conclusion, What is faith and who defines it?
Do we have to go back to the dictionary in the Bible again? Seriously?
Christian faith, at least, is to be persuaded that Christianity is true.
And what does persuasion mean? It means that someone is convinced. It says nothing about how the person is convinced or whether the position they're convinced to adopt is actually so. It says nothing about the rationality of the position. It says nothing about evidence. Being persuaded for bad reasons is still a bad thing.
Why? Because that's how the Bible defines it.
Assuming you ignore where the Bible actually defines it, of course.
This is inconvenient for atheists because they want to appear smart by using a cheap debating trick and define faith in a way that makes religious people seem inherently irrational.
Because they are. Because anyone who believes anything without objective evidence to support their belief is, by definition, irrational. And that includes people who believe in unicorns and leprechauns and alien abductions and Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and gods. Because until you can actually produce objectively defensible and demonstrable evidence that your gods are actually real, you're not acting logically and rationally, period.
And worse than that, they're also hypocrites for arguing in this way, because when their own arguments are used against them in order to redefine atheism, they would reject their own arguments.
Yeah, why don't you actually try that against an atheist and see how well you do? Because you're just arguing with yourself, asserting that you know what other people would actually do in a given situation. And I hate to break it to you, but you're wrong.
Atheists like to say they don't need religion to be moral, and they don't need Jesus to abide by the golden rule. Great. Prove it.
Exactly how many atheists are out there murdering people? I mean, atheists are dramatically underrepresented in prison populations. And the religious are dramatically overrepresented. Oh look, evidence!
You wouldn't like to have your position misrepresented, and when you correct people, you expect them to comply with what you've told them, and not just give you lame excuses for continuing to misrepresent you, right? Then treat us the way you want us to treat you. That's all I'm saying, and thanks for watching.
Then act like a rational human being for once in your life. I mean, I love watching these people get angry and then totally misunderstand what everyone around them is saying. Talk about beating up a straw man. You're pretending to have things that you don't have and then getting upset with people when they point it out to you. Duh? And then you wonder why people don't take you seriously. You shouldn't. You've earned it.
Everything changes.